Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next Community Corner. I am joined here with Matt from Hidden Machine. Hello there.
Hi.
So, what we're talking about today is, what was it, 6-7 months ago when the Alan Wake 2 trailer dropped?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's been a while back, and I know we both did our own individual quick analysis about what we can expect, but I
hmm
felt it was a good idea, so now that we're a little closer into the year, we're in the summer of 2022, to basically do our tinfoil hat theory, what we expect, what we hope to see, what would be cool, and just war game it and see what we can find.
Yeah, it was supposed to be around this time that we were going to get the next sort of, announcement or set of announcements, but Remedy decided to call that off and continue to stay quiet until next year. So this is kind of all we got at the moment.
Which is, honestly, I'm fine when companies do that, frankly, because
Yeah.
you don't want them to rush a product just to say, hey, look, we got something going, rather than just take your time. We've already waited over a decade. You're good.
Yes. Yeah, I have enough good faith stored up with them that, whatever they got to do to get it done, they should just go ahead and do it.
100%. And especially with how personal this is for Sam and the team in general. Yeah, I trust them to take care of our boy.
Totally.
So, just to start off, what I wanted to focus on was everything that was unanswered questions from the first game or American Nightmare, just little loose threads, so to speak, before we get into the official Alan Wake 2 stuff. So the last things I remember seeing, or at least the biggest questions at the end, was possibly what's going on with Rose and Nightingale.
Right. So Rose, yeah, it kind of feels like she's doing like a Lady of the Light kind of thing.
Exactly, and with Nightingale, the impression we got was that it's the new face of the Dark Presence, but we haven't heard anything from up until Control. We haven't heard anything about that actually being a thing, or if that was just supposed to be symbolic.
Right.
It's really kind of hard to say on there, and they kind of shifted perspective away from that towards the Herald character, the Mr. Scratch character, instead.
Right, but I'm curious. Do they mention Nightingale directly at all in Control?
No. Oh, I think they mentioned him as a missing person in one of the docs, but that's about it.
Okay. Yeah, it's been so long, and I know that they've said, when we started working on the sequel, things have shifted a lot since then because it's been in development so long, but it's a very striking shot at the end of Alan Wake, showing those two characters together. It kind of hangs on them for a moment. So I do think that at least we're gonna have their stories, their loose ends tied up. But it's hard to say who the sort of primary antagonist would be in the sequel, because there's room for several.
And we'll get to that when we get to the Alan Wake 2 spot. I have a few ideas about maybe not primary antagonists, but maybe secondary and tertiary antagonists, which I think would be fun, but we'll talk about that later. But at the bare minimum, I think it'd be fun at least to just have Rose show up, even in brief, to be the new Cynthia Weaver of the plot.
Totally.
But that's even under the assumption that we're spending time in Bright Falls for more than a few cameos.
True. Yeah, that's also hard to say. I know that, there's definitely going to be something going on there. And there's often, multiple narratives in Remedy games. So, maybe Alan's not necessarily in Bright Falls a lot, but there could be someone else. I don't know.
I have no idea. Like, I know there's a few things, like a little scenes along the road that we can kind of guarantee we'll see, but we'll get into that a little bit later as well.
Okay.
Other than that, talking about other antagonists, now one thing they did mention in American Nightmare is that the Dark Presence and the Herald, as I refer to it as, are only a couple of the intelligences there in the Dark Place, that there's a whole pantheon of entities that reside there, and we only see those two.
Right. And that reminded me a lot of, the different sort of entities that were present in Control, whether it was like the Hiss or Polaris. I don't know. I'm curious how far they'd go into that sort of thing. This sort of like, there is this other realm just full of as many entities as there are. How do you pull one of those and make it like, when you have, it's so open ended. And American Nightmare really does only briefly touch on that, but that's like a huge revelation if you're just thinking about it and theory crafting.
No, 100%. And they only talk about it, in one document, in one manuscript page, and that's it?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. That's a huge world-building thing that you never touch upon past that. And I guess the logical question would come in, where what's the nature of these entities that reside in there? Are they just innate, like the dark presences, where it's something maybe in the collective unconscious kind of thing? Or, okay, I'm going to get ahead of ourselves a little bit because it flows perfectly. But I was wondering, especially with the some of the promo art that came out recently about Alan Wake 2, they had that one image of the old lady, not sewing, but knitting, right?
Yeah.
And I'll put it up on screen for anybody who's watching the video feed of this. My question here, and this has just sent me down a random thought train, is what would happen if that's not a Taken? If other artists were trapped in the dark place over the course of millennia and never got out and never aged, and were just stuck there and went slowly crazy.
Yeah, I've had that same thought because it's never explicitly stated, but we know at least several people have entered that realm and have entered the dark place through various means, and it's also kind of like implied in American Nightmare that there's not only one entrance into the dark place. It's not inherently tied to Cauldron Lake, I don't think.
No, I think it's kind of iffy whether the oil derricks out there in the Arizona desert is another portal to the dark place, or that's just something that Alan crafted as part of the return manuscript. Who knows?
Yeah, it's hard to say for sure, but it does, I think, at least leave it open enough that, yeah, other people could definitely have gotten in there through various means, and obviously it's not that easy to escape. So
no, like like what would happen to someone like the idea I had was that lady knitting is literally, that is her form of art, is through as a seamstress, right? But she's been down there for, this is my headcanon, for centuries, slowly going crazy, and she can literally form reality and become a master of it, and she's antagonistic. And I'm wondering, like, if any of those other intelligences down there were like centuries or millennia old artists that never left and became like godly powerful.
yeah, I don't know. I like that theory quite a bit, and yeah, you definitely do see Alan, even in the 10 or so years he was down there, become very unraveled, and he talks even in even in American Nightmare, where he's relatively fresh in there, just his darkest feelings and thoughts, and even like intrusive thoughts and unintentional, just everything manifests itself around him in different ways. Sometimes he's more in control, sometimes he's not, and yeah, how could that sort of play out over many years? I don't know, that's a pretty powerful idea. I really like that.
And one thing that I would add on to it too is Mr. Scratch as a character as well, where if we see an enemy that has already completely descended into, an artist completely descended into their insanity, and we see Mr. Scratch as a representation of what Alan would become in the exact same process. This is the end result of who he will become if he continues and stays here. So it gives us that urgency, that clock, that we got to get out quick before we become this enemy over here. It's just one of those. It's like, I mean, like I think that'd just be a great basis for a story. But again, who knows what Remedy's gonna do? But I think that'd be fun.
True. I mean, we're just going off a piece of concept art, basically. But I mean, that's I think that's the strength of the storytelling they've done so far.
I mean, Remedy has set up such a rich universe for us to play around in that I don't want to say they can do anything. They almost can do anything with it, but everything's with reason and purpose. Like I saw a review, I forgot who did it, about Control and how it's weird with a purpose rather than just weird for weirdness' sake.
Totally, yeah.
And that's something that I always trust Remedy with, is it's not just going to get out there crazy for the sake of just saying, oh yeah, weird stuff's going on.
No, yeah, it's always there's always some logic behind it, or it's tied to some deeper, older archetypes and symbolism, and it's very classic storytelling in a lot of ways.
Absolutely love it. And you mentioned that there are other ways out of the dark place. Sorry, this is probably turning into just a theory crafting in general thing. Who knows how this is going to end up. But we see an example of that kind of with Zane in This House of Dreams, where he creates his own pocket universe out of the dark place and just says, you know what, I'm going to live here, bye.
Yeah.
Which begs the question about who the hell is this character we see in the AWE DLC, but that's another conversation for another time.
Yeah, Yeah, it's hard to say anything about Thomas Zane because outside of his appearance in Alan Wake, you never see his face. You barely know anything about him, and the few details you do get, like, they paint a picture of Thomas Zane, the poet, and he's in love, and the sacrifice, and Barbara Jagger, and everything. But then outside of the initial game, all of the information you get about him just is completely confusing.
Yeah, like
And
it seems
kind
it
of
seems like contradicts
negates
itself.
everything else you know. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's I mean, we could do a whole hour on just trying to figure out that character.
And what frustrates me too is when they did the remastered version of Alan Wake, they changed the posters in that intro nightmare sequence to be more in line with what they dropped in Control. So,
Right.
like, I don't know how meta Remedy would get with this, but it crossed my mind, what if the remastered actually isn't technically a remake of the original game, but it's like a retelling, kind of like you ever do Silent Hill Shattered Memories?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where it's not the same game, the same story, but
Totally.
it's a retelling of the same story with slight changes. Like, I'm like, that's something they would do.
Right, and it totally canonically would make sense, like, with how we understand Alan's experiences to be in the Dark Place.
Just like a twisted memory of, like, it's him remembering exactly what happened, and some things are slightly different.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I love this series. It's never ending. It's never ending.
Totally.
So the last thing before we move on into the Control-related stuff is, do you think Samantha Wells will show up in some capacity?
Yes, I really do. I don't know if we'll actually see her per se, because I think that she moved in to Ordinary after everything, happened, the Ordinary AWE that's kind of the catalyst for Control.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like at least in a document or something, I feel like there's got to be some mention of her, because I know that this House of Dreams blog, I've seen Sam Lake talk about it a little bit, and he said it was kind of just like a writing exercise, and he wasn't sure that people are going to respond so well to it. But the fact that they have, I think that there's probably going to be just a little bit of like a nod to fans who are digging that deep. There's got to be some minor, at least a wink at that story.
Like, I kind of hope there is at the end of the day, just because she's tied to Zane. She's got somewhat tied to Alan, but I think it's more Zane was talking to her than Alan personally.
Right. And indirectly, no, I think even directly, she does appear in Control.
Oh yeah, she does.
Through the
Yeah.
whiteboards and documents, and because the shoebox that she has, it was in possession of the FBC, and they talk about that. And so I don't, it's not unprecedented for them to revisit that character, and especially since she's she's kind of like right in the middle of Alan Wake and Control in terms of like, which story she's more aligned to.
Yeah,
So it makes sense for her to appear there.
No, 100%. And because, like, I understand from at the point in time, obviously, Control wasn't something they were thinking about when they wrote this, and it comes off like Samantha was a prototype version of Jessie, and they later ended up scrapping the idea and redoing her origin story.
Mm-hmm.
But this just gets into an idea I've had about the Remedyverse as a whole, why some things just seem so contradictory. Like, we're talking about, like, the Return trailer and Quantum Break, or just Quantum Break and how it fits in general, and random stuff like that. And it would not be out of the question if Alan is in a reality where he's literally writing, trying to find his way to escape. Remedy's experience trying to come up with an Alan Wake 2 story could reflect Alan trying to write his own escape, where I tried this, it doesn't work, let's try something else. So obviously there's going to be abandoned plot lines, like the Samantha Wells situation or the Quantum Break situation or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's even in some of the making of documentaries that come with the Steam version of Alan Wake, the special edition. They kind of talk about how even the troubled sort of development that game had wound up being reflected in some ways in the actual plot of the game. So it's like there's a funny thing whenever you're an artist making art about another artist. There's always going to be a sort of like unintentional meta narrative happening there.
Which I think
Whether or intentional, but it's going to be there no matter what.
And personally, I'd like to look at those, even though from a casual observer would see those, oh, these are just retcon mistakes. I'm like, no, 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 no. It's canon. Because of the nature of this story, we can officially make those canon.
Yeah, it totally works out that way. That's like, it's a lucky break for them, really, but it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I love it. All right, so we're moving officially into part 2, which is all of the stuff we learn in Control, moving forward into Alan Wake 2. So, before we received any promotional work, I was actually curious, because of where Alan's at, and how hard it would be in my head to write a story from his perspective. It looks like that's what they're doing, so I'm incorrect here. But I thought it'd be cool if we followed Alice for a brief period of time. And now that we officially can say, yes, Alice has been to the oldest house. She has contact with the FBC. She's had contact with Mr. Scratch. Consciously is aware of it. What involvement do you think she'll have with the narrative other than just show up at the end? I hope it's more than just a cameo.
Yeah, well, I know that Remedy has, for a long time, wanted to very intentionally have games with multiple protagonists. And we had that a little bit in Max Payne 2 when you switched over to Mona, and you didn't take control of anyone else in Alan Wake, but there was definitely sort of like the co-op missions that happened throughout the game.
Mm-hmm.
And then Quantum Break was supposed to have, I think, 3 or 4 different protagonists initially before they kind of broke it all down and said, this is we're going too wide. Let's gonna just narrow things down to Jack Joyce's story.
Mm-hmm.
So I would really love if there was like room in this game to play as Alice, and especially in a survival horror game. Obviously there's prior iterations of the sort of core themes of survival horror, but Resident Evil is kind of like the starting point of the modern survival horror genre. And that's always a game that's had multiple protagonists, multiple viewpoints to a story. So it really seems like there's a lot of pieces in place for us to explore something directly like Alice's story. And there's like seeing her as being tormented by Mr. Scratch. I mean, that's so perfect for like a survival horror scenario.
100%. And because like in my head, because we know she's a photographer, like have like Fatal Frame style mechanics in her sections.
Yes.
It would be perfect. Like you already have the game written at that point.
Yeah.
But like even if it's not like huge sections of the game, maybe just like Paul Serene sections, you know what I mean, where she's like researching stuff on the outside and she's getting hints about what's going on in the main plot with Alan, and it kind of just fills in the gaps a little bit for us.
Yeah, and I think of games like even like Insomniac's like Spider-Man. It's common in bigger mainstream games to have these sort of little asides with a minor character for a mission type that's kind of a break from the normal action. And I think this would be a great scenario for that sort of thing with any number of individuals in the sort of Alan Wake story. There's a lot of room for different people to pop up as playable characters if they chose to go that way.
100%. And I think it'd be like I'm just gonna say because the original voice actress unfortunately is no longer with us, but I think it'd do respect to the character because in the first game she was more of a narrative device. American Nightmare, she played a much bigger role, but I'm pretty sure the fanbase would love to see more of her, just in general.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, she is the whole reason Alan's even trying to escape. There's obviously some selfish reasons as well, and you see him as a very kind of conflicted character, but saving her and reuniting with Alice is kind of one of his core motivations, and whether or not that was satiated by the ending of American Nightmare, or if he's even still aware of her, if he's been in there too long and he's lost touch with his old life, it's hard to say. But if she's playing the role she has been, then she's a major motivation for Alan as a character.
Mm-hmm. I think just to leave this off, I think it'd be interesting, regardless of how they handle it, is have both of them fighting from both sides of the lake and meet in the middle.
Yeah, That's cool.
I'd like it to end that way. Anyways, so next on in there is we do know one thing that we can expect to see is we have the old Cauldron Lake Lodge is now a monitoring station for the FBC. And we have an Agent Estevez that mans the whole thing up. So we know there's at least there's some FBC present on site.
Yeah, and the fact that that was a named character could have been a throwaway line, but it makes me think that we'll likely see that character play some sort of minor role, at least, in Alan Wake 2.
100%. And considering we also have now official confirmation about the Breaker family, as it relates to everything going on with the FBC in Bright Falls, we have our network of people over there to deal with, which is nice. And like, I love that little detail. I don't know if you saw it during your playthrough of the remastered, but in Sheriff Breaker's office, they had a letter from the FBC saying, and she's like, "Oh, I got to send that to Dad or something."
Yeah,
like that.
I think she says she has to ask her dad about it, and the fact that this is just my own little thought on it, but the fact that he. I mean, Frank Breaker, Sheriff Breaker's father, that he like hid this from his daughter for so long. It seemed like he wasn't totally upfront about it, and it in Alan Wake, it's kind of left vague if she knows about the FBC or if she's totally aware of the more like paranatural events that may have happened in that region. But the way she reacts to that letter from the FBC. In Alan Wake Remastered, it seems like she's not totally aware of what the FBC is and what it all means. So I think that leads, an opening for maybe her to somehow be at odds with the FBC and kind of have this sort of like struggle, because as much as the FBC is like a very strong force, there, even in control, there's people who don't always agree with the ethics of the organization. And I think there's room to like continue that sort of battle with someone who is maybe emotionally attached to Breaker and everything, but also kind of feels conflicted about the work her father's done.
And sorry, just on that note, I have to do a shameless plug here. So if anyone's following the Archivist series, that's part of what I'm trying to do is explore the ethics about what they're doing. And in some that's why there's a Argus file release called Disgruntled Employee, because I really want to play around and explore those themes. Anyways, sorry, moving away from the shameless plug there. So yeah, like in my opinion, for Miss Sheriff Breaker, she's very much aware of the weirdness of Bright Falls and Cauldron Lake in this place of power. I'm not sure if she's aware about the weirdness as a whole on the global scale, more like a microcosm of that world. And another cool thing I think would be fun to explore is we know that, was it 2017? I want to say it's a couple years before Jesse shows up. William Kirkland resigns from the investigation
I think he
sector.
resigned in 2019 from my notes.
It was in 2019? Okay, it's I want to say it's fairly recent before Jesse arrives.
Right.
I don't recall the exact details, but I know he's still in touch with Frank.
Right.
So it'd be maybe possible, since he's the he's the last of the old guard, so to speak, since everyone died during the course of Control or is now gone, that William Kirkland may show up at some point as a last representative of the old guard of the Bureau.
That would be really cool.
I mean, even just for cameo's sake.
Yeah, there's a lot of characters I'd like to see revisited, even if briefly mentioned in a document or something, just to kind of see, like, where'd they go?
Like, I get the feeling, like, I hope that Remedy goes into more multimedia stuff, because how this narrative's starting to expand outwards, it is ripe for, like, a comic book universe style where we can just explore a couple hundred different characters and follow their plots. Because imagine, what happened with Kirkland after he left? Did he get into any weird stuff going on there? What was Frank's story like? I mean, we have a comic book about one of Frank's stories.
Right.
I'm pretty sure you could publish that into a 24 comic strip.
Yeah, and I also think with that, in the immediate like months before Alan Wake was released, they put out ads saying like, go to Xbox.com and watch the TV show before you play the game. And between the Alan Wake Files book and the comics and everything, I think the comics were kind of not released initially. I think they were released in 2012 with the PC release of the game, but they did a lot of multimedia stuff for first Alan Wake game. And I was pretty disappointed personally that none of that like bonus files were included in the remaster edition. So I don't want to think that those things are being like retconned. I think it maybe is just actually maybe like a sort of delivery issue with Epic, because the Epic as a service is not as robust as Steam. I think they just like recently have started adding like achievements to games and stuff. Like they're getting there. They're getting up to speed. I really hope we see, at least, you know, to some degree, some more of that same attention given to the multimedia stuff, even preceding the release of the game.
And I think that's what they're planning to do with the TV show. Now that we know it's still moving forward, but the impression I'm getting from all the promotional stuff I've seen for that is that they're planning on, telling the story of Alan Wake, but then expanding upon it and letting those tendrils move out into other avenues of the universe.
Yeah, I don't think we've spoken about it directly, but I have said that I would really like to see an Alan Wake show that doesn't necessarily even have to focus on him, but just about Bright Falls or the characters in that town, in that universe. Like there's so many different stories that can be told there just as interesting as his story.
I mean, just think of like a Fringe style TV show focused on like Sheriff Breaker and everything going on there, and just follow a procedural, episodic, weird shit.
Yeah, totally.
Like I'd say if they were gonna do that, I wouldn't make it go past maybe one season or two, only because like when eventually you start running out of ideas and it just starts to get a tedious droll.
Right.
Have it like a very self-contained narrative. Once you're done, move past it.
Yeah, like a True Detective, sort of just like the story arc is that season and that's it.
Exactly, because I can't count how many shows I have seen that started off really good for a season or two and then they just dragged on.
Yeah, you hate to see that.
I mean, like Haven's a good example of that. I don't know if you ever watched that one.
No, I'm not familiar.
Yeah, that going back to a previous part of the conversation, it started off really good. It's technically a Stephen King. It's somewhat based upon a short story he did a while back, but after the first two seasons, it turned into weird for weird's sake, and nothing made sense. And it was just like, really? That's what you're doing?
Yeah, that's an easy trap to fall into after a while.
Like, not even kidding. We have horseshoe crabs from another dimension as prophets. Like, I'm not even joking. That's literally a plot point.
Writing's hard.
Yeah, I'm just like, the first season was so beautiful, though. Anyways, I'm not going to complain anymore. Moving onwards. But yeah, like, in terms of a TV show, I think that'd be a very self-contained. I know Netflix has shown interest in a Control show.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know if that is even going to move forward, to be honest. But if they're going to do something, maybe not a TV show, I think the PvE game they're working on is going to be a good basis for it.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see how that comes along.
Because like what we're looking at in terms of that one piece of promotional artwork or so, where we have the 4 agents sitting there with the cadaver and the body bag, it just gives me the impression this is a point in time before the events of Control, so it's technically a prequel to the story where everything is running fine, and it just seems like an AWE response team.
Right. I yeah, and like a field team that's, you know, going out, and I think they've said a little bit, I think it was maybe in the investors meetings or in a press release, but they've mentioned that as much as they're exploring doing these sort of online multiplayer sort of things, they're very aware of wanting to maintain the strong narrative elements from their other games. So like, I don't know exactly how that will play out in a sort of, you know, basically like what will likely be like a match-based sort of PvE, like round-based kind of game, but I could see all sorts of like lore and documents and collectibles that would be an optional thing for players to actually check out. But if you're into that sort of thing, there's so much more opportunity for world building there for them.
Yeah, it's like, even if they only, let's just go with other like competitive PvEs, you only have maybe like 6 to 10 arenas that you play on repeat, right? But each one is an individual AWE. And if you want, rather than just doing the objective, you can just run around and look at the world building, because Remedy's masters of environmental storytelling. So if you just run around in, like, give yourself a hack so you can't take damage, and then just play around and look around the environment.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't use any cheats or anything, but that's definitely how I approached Crossfire X. I just wanted to see what was in that game, you know, more I was more so interested in just picking up the little details than anything else. As much as I like the story, it was exciting to be in a first-person Remedy world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Crossfire X, that's a whole nother story. We've already discussed that one to death, though. So let's move onwards to that one. But yeah, and the other plot line I thought would be fun to explore in that, besides the AWE, is if we have a paracriminal organization that we're kind of at odds with. So that'd be a good idea to explore the Blessed Organization, for example, where it's not just one individual AWE response, but it's all linked into one network of events.
Yeah, I have a feeling that there will be at least reference to that, but my gut tells me that they're gonna save really diving into that for the sequel to Control.
Maybe just like provide a little bit of backstory and context, and then the real plot happens in Control 2. Because my opinion,
that's my impression. Because I feel like as much as Control laid a foundation for, but laid the groundwork for Alan Wake 2. I think Alan Wake 2 is going to do a lot to kind of like set the scene for Control 2, or whatever the Control sequel will be called.
100%, and we already know it has something to do with that symbol in the ocean view. In the game code, it's called Control 2. I don't know what that means, but whatever. But I fully anticipate, based upon all the research I've done and how linked Blessed seems to be with the board, weirdly enough, I'm fully expecting the conflict between the former and the board, the nature of the board, and the Blessed Organization to be the main focus of Control 2.
Yeah, same here. That's definitely my hope for the story, because that's all stuff I'm super interested in finding out more about anyway.
100%. And like those are the biggest questions at the end of the story, like just like you said. And it gives us an excuse to leave the house and go on a worldwide adventure rather than being stuck in one place.
Yeah.
Which, I cannot wait. I cannot wait till we get more news.
Yeah, I'm really stoked for that stuff.
Oh boy. So yeah, that's a great one here. So one thing we can also look at technically is the entire network that Frank Breaker has in Bright Falls, basically the Night Springs group that Sarah had us take a look at, or at least Barry contact. And I doubt all of them are retired FBC, but I think they're just people that Frank picked up over the years when they experienced something and just kind of brought them into the fold.
Yeah, I think that, Frank, even in the comic, he talks briefly about how he's encountered werewolves and all sorts of like otherworldly stuff that he never thought would have actually existed. I think if you go on long enough like that, you are going to run into people, and I feel like they're kind of bonding through this very particular type of trauma and experience. I could definitely see them kind of like maybe even congregating to that region because it's kind of out of the way. It's quiet relatively. So yeah, I don't think we get a lot of details on who those people are, but there's definitely room to keep going through with that, because I don't remember now for sure if they talk about several AWEs in Bright Falls or just the two big ones. But it does seem like a region that's been, that's experienced a lot of oddities.
Yeah, like if we're talking about for the at least Cauldron Lake, we have the big three. That's going to be the Andersons.
The
tsunami.
Andersons, yes.
So that big storm hurricane that they had over there, the volcanic explosion, and then the Allen situation. But I think the only other ones we see are from the comic, which is semi-canon at best. I'm gonna just consider it canon with the little retcons, but because you mentioned the werewolf thing, they have like moving trees that just get up and start wandering around, just weird stuff. And even Sarah mentions like, yeah, this town gets weird, not this weird though. So they're probably used to little oddities.
Yeah,
but not to this cataclysmic degree.
Yeah, agreed.
And two things I wanted to throw up there. Now that we're moving let's move away from Bright Falls and move to its neighboring town of Watery real quick.
Mm-hmm.
So we know Ahti is vacationing there right now.
Yes.
And like I don't know if it's just a coincidence or if he's like, oh yeah, I need to be over here for a little bit. It wouldn't surprise me if he's fully aware.
Yeah, he seems omniscient, and it's another one of those things in Control where it seems extremely important, and they really kind of like put it right in your face. and then they kind of just leave you with it,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of just think about. Um, but I do think the fact that they linked this mysterious, powerful character to Watery and then linked Watery to Bright Falls, it feels like we're likely going to cross through there in some way.
Well, 100, I think we're gonna have to at some point. Mostly because they have that situation linking Watery with the Cult of the Tree. I don't know if you followed that.
Yes, quite a bit, and I'm kind of coming up blank on anything more than just vague theories. But again, the Cult of the Tree does seem, because it shows up in the AWE DLC, seems like it's likely going to be a big part of Alan Wake 2, more so than Control.
100%.
But I think it is going to be like I think even that could be a sort of paracriminal organization in more of an occult sense. More so than like the Blessed, like it kind of seems more a traditional organized crime as we might know it, using paranatural weaponry basically. Whereas the Cult of the Tree seems like they're more in line with the older, more occult sort of definition of the paranatural stuff like we saw discussed in the Foundation.
Like, while you're talking, I just had a random thought. I know that Silent Hill 5 gets a lot of grief, but I'm curious if the Cult of the Tree essentially are descendants of some of the original inhabitants of Bright Falls that ended up going, like, they understood what was going on with the lake and said, well, we're not going to hang out here. Let's go nearby, but we still want to be close enough because we can take advantage of that power at the same time.
Yeah.
But we don't want to live there. It's just kind of like the people who lived in the town next to Silent Hill. They understood what it was, but we're not going to live there because it's effed up.
Right, and it's I can't really say too much. I rewatched the Alan Wake 2 teaser before having this discussion with you, and seeing again the sort of the interlaced triangles symbol. It appears twice in the teaser, and that is very similar to the symbol we see on the Cult of the Tree sticky note in Control. But it's in different orientations. It's like it's upright, then it's on its side, and that makes me wonder if there's, almost similar to the way the board, they talk about the orientation of the triangle in Control. Is there some sort of duality to this entity, and maybe there's another side of it that we're not entirely aware of yet? Because we see it as this like sort of one thing right now.
Yeah, like I was thinking about why there's the difference in orientation too with those triangles, because at this point we kind of accept that they're somewhat related to the Cult of the Tree. What that
possibly
means.
Yes.
Like it just because again they have it on the investigation board and the map from the
and maybe it could just be some way to communicate. Like maybe it doesn't mean anything more than that. Like I think of like the thieves symbols in Skyrim.
It's just the different. It's just a different orientation that throws me. Like, the only thing that can come to mind is Dylan's speech when he's doing his dream speech. Of if we have the two triangles and let's just go off on a random tinfoil here, that each triangle represents a different tier of reality. If they're on top of each other, then it's the worlds above and below, and if they're next to each other, it's the worlds side by side.
Yeah.
And that's the relationship. But again, I have no idea.
No, and yeah, it's hard to say. And I think, too, not to get too far off topic, but the final sort of scene that you have with Dylan where you see his sort of, like, vision, post-game, when you come back to his hospital cell, basically, it does kind of seem like it's possible that the Hiss has either escaped or has a larger presence, or there's some other threat over the city. And I do wonder if that is going to be tied to exploring the city in Alan Wake 2, because it's very obvious that there's going to be some sort of thing where Alan is in the Remedy version of New York City. And if everything is in the timeline as we understand it to be, that progression of those events would just butt right up against one another.
Yep. 100%. And Okay, so this is just me going off another tangent here, but we're talking about in the AWE, we had that, few frames showing the map of Bright Falls and
Yes.
Watery, showing the cult of the tree. That is the same map we see in the Return trailer from Quantum Break. And I'm curious if that's a flash and it's intended to be part of Alex Casey and Saga Anderson's investigation.
Yeah, I feel like that's a strong possibility. And I mean, again, with Alex Casey, there's a lot to talk about there. I kind of feel like it's possible that he could be playing a similar role to Nightingale, in that he might be pursuing Alan.
Oh, 100%. Like, it's basically a given that they're looking for him.
Right.
See, how I look at it is, let's do a quick backtrack in terms of how the Dark Place and Alan's power works. So it's flat out said in Control that once the story's over, all the alterations kind of cease, other than the lingering aspects to it. So that's the reason why you can't just create something out of nothing. You can't just create a person. Like, for example, Jessie. Now, if Alan did write Jessie into existence, and the second her story's done, she just vanished from reality.
Right.
And that's not the case. She's obviously existed before, and she existed after the plot. But for Alex Casey, as we see in the Return trailer, for anyone who's not familiar, there's a trailer at the beginning of Quantum Break you find in a TV in a tent on the university campus that deals with the character Alex Casey, which is Alan's character he wrote for his crime novels, and a blonde FBI agent who we get a name for is Saga Anderson. And it's implied that it's either like a great niece or a grandchild of Odin and Thor, is the inference we're getting here. And over the course of the trailer, we see that Alex Casey gets killed, and she continues on past that to start investigating what happened. And it's implied as Mr. Scratch came out and killed him, right?
Yeah, that's definitely a way to interpret it.
So, and honestly, in Control, when we get to the AWE DLC, we find, yes, Alex Casey, there is an FBI agent running around. So it seems like they're drawing upon that dead plot line a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But talking about how you can't just create a character out of nothing, it would make sense that you have to kill Casey. Because the second that the story's over, he would vanish anyways, so how do you get around that loophole? Just write his death. Because then you can create him, kill him, and he's gone.
Right, but it's interesting because he's already written his death. And I almost get the impression that, and this, I could be totally off here, but in the remaster, there's the 3 different visions that you can encounter from Alan Wake. I feel like we're getting into a lot of deep cuts here, but there's the 3 vision videos, and I struggle. I've seen different analyses of those. I struggle to really, kind of narrow on what I think it really means and what they're really referring to. But I feel like one way to interpret it is that he almost resurrects Alex Casey, because, in the final novel, Sudden Stop, that's, Casey's death. And one of the documents you find in Alan Wake is that final paragraph where he talks about dying and being at peace. Mm-hmm. So if Alex Casey, that's referred to in Control, is this sort of, Alex Casey that Alan's manifested, there would have to be some sort of like rebirth process.
No, 100%. And how that would work out, and because I always looked at those 3 things as Alan coming out of the lake with amnesia, but that makes sense too if it was Casey, that he created him, shoved him out of the lake, and then he went onwards to carry out his story.
Yeah, I can see it both ways.
It makes sense from a narrative perspective too, because for the longest time, what I thought Alan Wake 2 would be is, after AWE specifically, is that Alex Casey was remanifested, resurrected, whatever you want to call it, showed up in Saga Anderson's life, put her on a path, and then gets killed, so he's removed from the narrative because you can't just create people out of nothing. And so that's really just a tool to get an investigation going.
Yeah. Yeah, that has legs.
Which would also get into the themes of morality when it comes to Alan, because you're literally creating something just to kill them.
Yeah, and I feel like I can't remember where, I think it's in Control, he talks briefly about sort of almost like casualties of his process, and how he's, kind of accepted that.
And I know there's a conversation with the doctor from American Nightmare are the same thing. And even the very first scene of the original game in the Nightmare, he creates the hitchhiker, kills him off, and never finishes the story because he doesn't know what to do from there. So he created a character just to kill them, and here he'd be doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So it's just a reoccurring thing. Because honestly, well, we're already way off the reservation at this point. The biggest thing I see with trying to understand Alan's power is completely, what's the morality of this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're killing off hundreds of people just to get your wife back, dude. How is that fair?
Right. And, I think that there's great possibility for him to be confronted with that in a very ugly way in a sort of M-rated, hard horror survival game where he's kind of, I think that a lot of the violence, because I mean there's a lot of violence and like almost like implied gore in Alan Wake and even in Control to a degree, but they've said they're going for like a harder sort of rating on this one, and I could see it being the kind of thing where he has to really face like he has become a murderer basically.
Essentially, yeah, not directly, but 100%. And sorry, because I recently played, maybe like 4 months ago, finished like Evil Within series.
Oh yeah,
and it just the idea that everybody that he kills in the furtherance of his story, what would happen if they literally just grabbed like an amalgamation of every soul that he's destroyed and threw them into the embodiment of one monster?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I was thinking something very similar, because I think that I could be wrong here, but I got vague impressions of the Evil Within, especially the first one, from just the promotional materials and the concept art and the teaser for Alan Wake 2. I could definitely see that game being a big influence on this one.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that they kind of in the Evil Within, how those people are sort of manifested as the enemies. I'd love to see something like that. I think that'd be really powerful.
Just a confrontation of his own guilt would be something we really need to pay attention to, because this is messed up. We understand that regardless of the situation.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move past the Control stuff, and we're going to get into the meat, the fun parts of this, tinfoil hat theories.
Okay.
All right, so the first one's a little bit easier. We're going to look at the New York cityscape that we see with all the neon signs everywhere in the trailer. So the first ones I note is we have neon signs saying Ocean View and Initiation.
Hmm?
So obviously the Ocean View being reference to the motel, Initiation being the second phase of the hero's journey, which I find kind of funny that they'd throw that in there, considering if we go back to the blackboard in Quantum Break, that's the skipped step. It's almost like this is Alan's acknowledgement that he can't just leave and then return. He has to go through the trials.
Exactly, yeah.
And this is where we're at with it. Now,
yeah,
what's this New York?
It's so blatant.
He's like, okay, yeah, I got it. Thank you, writers. Thank you, Campbell. I figured it out. I can't just go back and have a happy ending. I gotta go through the shit. Which brings me back to the narration over the trailer.
Mm-hmm.
We're not gonna get the best of happy endings here. I'm just gonna throw that out.
Right.
They flat out say, yeah, it might have been better to live with the hope that something good comes out of this, because that's not what the story is.
Yeah. Yeah, they're very upfront.
And I'm kind of like, oh boy, here we go. But there's two big things, though, that I wanted to run past you, which is a random thought I had. This New York scene.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, we have the subway station there. We got the phone booths that we see Alan talking to. I don't... I think they've said that this is New York. I don't think it's actually New York, though.
Okay.
I think that we're seeing a version of noir York City.
I've definitely had the same thought. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but it makes me wonder how long the deal with Rockstar had been in development, with them announcing the Max Payne remakes of 1 and 2 being handled by Remedy. And their working relationship with Rockstar and everything being pretty amicable between the two companies, especially in terms of creative and collaborative works across multiple mediums, it does make me wonder if it could literally be the Noir York City from Max Payne. Maybe they don't say Max Payne. Maybe they don't say John Mira or anything. But I could see it being the sort of thing where it's like a very overt reference to that. And that being kind of like, I mean, the whole story of Noir York City and Mira and everything, like that was already directly referenced, I believe, in American Nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
And it is kind of, you know, a prototype for what Alan's experiencing with his own doppelganger and his, you know, loose grip on reality.
100%. And it's just something that anybody who's worked in an artistic field long enough will tell you, is that you use previous things you've done as inspiration for what you're doing right now. The only reason that they name the words Mira was here is in the bathroom is because we can assume since it's made from Alan's unconscious, is that he wrote it at one point during his books. It was a theme in the Alex Casey novels.
Right, because that whole place is a construction of his own mind.
Mm-hmm. And the only reason it would be there is because, hey, it's somewhere down in his head. He's thought about it before.
Right. Either he is the author or he's watched that show or, you know, whatever. It's hard to say.
And like it wouldn't be the first time that Alan's drawn upon previous inspiration to create what he's working on now. I mean, we're talking about the lighthouse motif. That's from Errand Boy. We have the concept of the separated father. That's from Errand Boy.
Mm-hmm.
But it just seems like a perfect example of using a previous concept, creating the reality of Noir York inside the dark place, and using that as a place to move around in.
Yeah, and I think realistically speaking, you know, just in terms of game design and everything, having it be this alternate version of New York City would give them a lot more leeway, you know? Mm-hmm. And if they were to have Alan in New York City, like real New York City, battling enemies and everything, it'd be this cataclysmic event. And I think that would raise the stakes, like, way too high.
Oh,
in
100%.
A way, you know?
Because there's going to be, like, tens of thousands of people getting caught in the crossfire left and right. That would be bad. And, of course, we don't know if the FBC is still stuck in the building lockdown. Because if they are, then they just have to be aware that people are dying from weird shit and they can't do anything about it.
Right.
Or if they do get involved, but that's wargaming, something that I don't think we're going to get that far down. I don't think the FBC is going to have too much of an involvement in this game, to be honest.
No, I think that their presence will be made known, you know, probably in documents and things and some sort of, you know, whatever the sort of meta narratives are, or the sub narratives in there and everything. But I don't think I don't think they'll be fighting alongside Alan or anything.
No, like I know a lot of people are excited to see like an Avenger-style crossover event. I don't know if Remedy would ever do something to that scale. Frankly.
Yeah, there was a quote, you know, not that long ago I read somewhere where, you know, they said something, I can't remember if it was Sam Lake, if it was another one of the head writers, but they basically said, it would be cool if we could get to that place, if it made sense to do it. Like, definitely, that'd be great, but you know, they haven't laid that groundwork yet. And even, you know, in the Marvel films and everything, I feel like that took like a decade of consistent releases for them to even get to that point.
Exactly. And it just seemed like they said, it has to be an earned part of the story. It has to make sense. They'd have to write it to lead towards it. They can't just say, oh yeah, everyone's Jack and Alan and Max and Jesse are all teaming up together. I'd just be like, okay, what? That'd be more fan service than anything.
Yeah, and that's not really where they're at. So,
no, not at all. But like, if we do have that Noir York, I actually wonder if some version of Mira would show up, or some version of the Poet Pool would show up.
Yeah, I would really hope so. I think that'd be a really fun cameo and a way to kind of link things together further. Like, yeah, just, you know, I know I'm kind of just reiterating, but I think there's great potential for some really fun references to the Max Payne series right now, especially considering the whole, like, just the legality of it at this point, where I think they have license possibly to be a lot more explicit about things. Yeah, that'd be really fun to have Mira, even though there is kind of like a Mira, a sort of echo of that idea already happening. A more direct sort of appearance would be really sick.
And that's honestly the first thing that came to my mind when I found out that they were remastering Max Payne 1 and 2, and that Remedy was going to be directly doing the work on it. I'm like, okay, we can actually start linking back to that storyline now.
Yeah, it's the perfect time to do so, where, it will definitely further confuse the relationship between Max, Alex Casey, and Alan Wake, but I think that'd be a lot of fun to kind of untangle that mess.
Like, so, okay, sidetracking again real quick, because we understand, based upon Dylan's dreams, that there's multiple tiers of reality, right? And that in one reality, Alan wrote the story about Casey, and in another reality, Casey was a real person named Max, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the technical definition of inspiration essentially there's something out there in the unconscious reality that you start resonating with, and then you start using that as inspiration to write, correct?
Mm-hmm.
What would happen if one of those realities where Max Payne existed is the original reality that Alan had no knowledge of, but it's something that unconsciously inspired him, and he wrote his own version of that reality in his Alex Casey books?
Yeah,
like one of the branches on the out of the oldest house is the Max Payne reality, and Alan unconsciously picked up on it and started writing it.
I've had very similar thoughts. I can't really confirm that, but I feel like there's definitely legs to that theory, and it could totally work out that way. It would work canonically, I think, to interpret things that way.
It's like they have to do something weird, batshit crazy like that.
Yeah, and the fact that you see the I think you mentioned the Ocean View Motel sign in the trailer. I know this isn't actual gameplay, and this is just sort of like an early concept video in a way. But if this is like a Noir York City, and there is a link from that place to the Ocean View, and the Ocean View to the FBC building, it leaves room for these different tiers of reality to have different connecting tunnels, basically,
I'm so glad you said that, because my very next point involves how we can connect all of these tiers of reality together. So, the reason why I think it's such a brilliant thing to have Noir York City is because of the subway station. Now, we see that as a prominent role in the trailer, and it would be totally something Alan would do to make a artificial construct with a subway station where each stop is a different reality that's linked together. I just imagine jumping on the subway and you're moving over and you're in the Ocean View now, or now you're in Noir York, or now you're in Bright Falls, or now you're over here, and it'd be a really easy way to allow the Remedy Connected Universe the Multiverse, I should say, to finally be linked together and have easy pathways. Like with the oldest house, it's not easy, it's kind of random how they link together. But here is a very conscious, intentional way to link realities together.
Yeah, totally. We're completely on the same page there.
Perfect. And because, in my opinion, the only way to really do this is in the Dark Place. At least do it properly, because we've seen Thomas Zane create his own pocket universe. So we know that creating new realities out of the seed of the Dark Place, so to speak, is possible. And if we see it happen once, the logical question is, well, the prime reality where Jesse and Alan come from, when did that bud of a reality start to sprout out of the seed of the Dark Place?
Right.
As if we were created millions of years ago, or at least this reality was created millions of years ago out of the Dark Place.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely thought about that, and the deeper you go into those sort of theories, it's like, it gets pretty heady, basically. But I think there's a lot of room to definitely explore that in this game, and even just narratively, the way they show Alan in the trailer, in the teaser trailer, sort of like, he's standing still, I think, or walking slowly in the back of the scene as these different scenes shift into one another. And I do get the impression that there is going to be some sort of mechanic in the game where we're kind of going between realities, which is, it's kind of like the whole crux of American Nightmare is that from the dark place, there are places where the sort of fabric of our, prime reality is a bit more thin and malleable, and he can kind of push through there.
Mm-hmm.
So like we know he's been able to figure that out to a degree. And I have a strong feeling that's going to be explored in different ways in this sequel.
And like I think New York would be a perfect example of that to happen too, because what do we have in New York? We got the oldest house. No one would argue that that dark place can't leak out of that place.
Totally. Yeah, and I mean there's so much precedence again for the worlds to sort of collide. I mean, even it was brought up to me again recently. I kind of forgot about it, but in Alan Wake, there's a strong reference to the snowstorm that's happening during the entirety of Max Payne in the first game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's almost implying that on some level, Alan Wake was living in a shared reality with that story in some way.
In some way, exactly. And I think that we can actually point to the exact moment when all of sorry to tangent real quick, the exact moment when Alan's current manuscript started affecting and pushing the dominoes down, so to speak. He set them all up, and the second that Jesse answered the call, went into the ocean view and let the spiral door open, that's when all of his narratives flew out and started to affect reality in that exact moment. Before that, he was locked behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And we see everything from there. But 100%, my guess for Alan Wake 2 is we're going to officially find a way to link the multiverse of the RCU together and allow travel between them. Whether that's going to only exist for the purposes of this one story, who knows? I think that'd be fair, that you can only really do this kind of easy travel in Alan Wake 2, and then after that, those lanes close down.
Yeah, totally. And it doesn't mean that the dark place would necessarily cease to exist, but it just wouldn't be something that all characters and all, narratives would have access to that same sort of system. I could definitely see it having like a indirect effect beyond this game.
Oh, 100%. It just goes back to the idea that once the story is over, all the creations kind of just vanish and dissolve back into mist.
Right.
So they would exist, all these connections would exist for Alan to use, and once this plot's done, they just become the mist again.
Yeah.
Because let's be honest, if we kept that type of multiverse hopping throughout the rest of it, it would just make things way too crazy.
No, yeah, it'd be impossible to tell like a cohesive story. I also think that fans would be wanting too much from a game. They'd want it's good to have a more narrowed focus most of the time, just to get the thing done.
No, 100% on there. And yeah, I think just showing that in this setting, this is something that can happen, but we're not going to keep it there all the time. Otherwise, it'll just get ridiculous. It would turn into the MCU where there's thousands of universes that are all do crazy stuff. Like, no. This is more of a character-driven, zoomed-in narrative structure, not a wide, big one.
Right.
But, yep. So, do you have any other things you want to throw in there? Any other tinfoil theories?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that really had stuck with me from the teaser trailer, aside from, we touched on the Cult of the Tree stuff and the Ocean View Motel, the Poet Cinema sign that you see there, obviously that's a reference to Thomas Zane, who has been, seen as both a filmmaker and a poet at different points in the Remedy universe. That last time we saw Thomas Zane in AWE and he was Alan's doppelganger, I think a lot about how you don't ever see Thomas Zane's face. I don't think ever. I think there's, even in the Alan Wake files, there's a photograph of him and his face has been blocked out. So we don't ever get his identity, but there's two things I think are kind of interesting, and this is just, again, just tinfoil hat shit, but with Thomas Zane is voiced by James McCaffrey, who is also the voice of Max Payne and is also the voice of Alex Casey when Alan is reading pages from his own Alex Casey manuscript. He's reading a page from The Sudden Stop, and in his head, when he's reading that, that's voiced by the same voice that is Thomas Zane.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very interesting that, you know, Thomas Zane, he already knows his voice in a way. And then seeing Zane appear, the first time we see Zane's face, just looks like Alan. You know, it makes me wonder, again, who came first, who made who, and even right when Alan Wake was released, I mean, there's articles from 2010 where fans are saying there's a strong theories proposing the idea that they may be the same person. And seeing that doppelganger scene, you know, it's hard to know what we're actually seeing, given the fact that, you know, the spiral door, we don't know the true nature of that place. We don't know how, if we're seeing, you know, things filtered by Alan's insanity, basically. But the fact that we never get a sort of clear and final understanding of Thomas Zane's identity or origins. You know, we keep getting these conflicting stories. It's like the Joker, you know, he's always got a different reason why he had his scars, and you know, it's because the original actual true origin of this character is just totally left unknown. I keep revisiting that theory that possibly Alan and Zane are the same person. And if that is the case, you know, how does that work? Because it lends to a lot of questions about, well, if they are the same person, is Alan Zane or is Zane Alan, and did one of them come first? You know what I'm trying to say?
No, I completely understand. And, like, I think one easy way to do this, if we're going to go off on the theory that they're the same individual, what if Zane is simply the creative aspect of Alan's unconscious? So, like, obviously we all have different personalities that we have, right? All different hats we wear. If the Thomas Zane persona is just that artist, writer, poet aspect of Alan.
Yeah. I've thought about that, like him being a sort of like compartmentalized aspect of Alan's psyche, like it, you know, manifested in some way. Like that's definitely possible. And the fact that, you know, the thing that a lot of people refer to that I don't think we ever got a satisfactory answer to is that it almost appears that Thomas Zane is the one who wrote Alan Wake's origin story.
Mm-hmm. And I go back and forth,
you know,
on that one too.
It's, yeah, and I do as well. But if you're thinking that, you know, possibly if Zane is Alan, and it is, you know, Alan's creativity writing that thing to save him, like he wrote this, you know, story about himself basically, to give him the clicker when he needed it, and then because he couldn't just like, he, you know, it has to be a work of you know, fiction, it has to be a creative work. It couldn't necessarily be this autobiographical thing. It couldn't be, so he had to have an author who wrote this story, you know what I'm trying to say, to keep it within the sort of like creative confines of Dark Place, and you know, had to create these sort of like a conduit to give himself new abilities.
Yeah, because you can't just write yourself superpowers, as Dr. Meadows would say.
Right, but you could write someone else who writes you superpowers, possibly.
Exactly. It's like, in a weird sense, absolutely. Because like, it just goes back to something. I don't know if you've noticed this, just as a complete sidetrack. I actually have done something similar to that, where you give your own creativity its own individual name. So if you've watched some of my earlier videos, I used to do this a lot, where I'd put quotes but at the beginning and at the end of it. Well, some of them were written by somebody, an individual that no one knew who they were. I've had people comment like, who is this person? I want to find out more about this, and I can't find them, right? And the thing is, that person doesn't exist. It's basically anytime I write a section of poetry myself, I'll credit it to this individual.
Totally, right? Yeah.
So, like, it wouldn't surprise me if that's who Tom the Poet is for Alan, is that's a pseudonym that he uses in some of his writings.
It would totally make sense, especially because it seems like the work that Alan Wake is known for, is not really the same type of work that Zane is known for in terms of their literature. And
But their
it's
themes
very
are the
common
same.
for yeah, but it's common for writers to have pen names for different types of projects.
Mm-hmm.
For whether that's contractual or just an artistic choice, there's a lot of precedence for that sort of thing.
Editing Dean here. So there isn't a counter argument for this entire section. We find at the very beginning of the game, as soon as Alan and Alice get to the cabin, I'll play it right here.
A shoebox filled with books by Thomas Zane sat on the shelf. I'd never heard of him before.
Hello? Anyone here?
This right here says that Alan is not consciously aware of anyone by the name of Thomas Zane. So if we're still going to go by this hypothesis, it just would mean that Zane is an aspect that he is not consciously aware of, quote end quote. Anyways, again, tinfoil hat theory, but I'll go ahead and throw it back to the main podcast. 100%. And that even helps to bring up something that happens at the end of the first game where you're listening in on the scene where Zane cuts out Barbara's heart.
Mm-hmm.
He hears them as himself and Alice.
Right. That confuses things even more, but I think it does lend itself to possibly, again, the theory where they're somehow, they are the same person. I do like that idea of as much as Mr. Scratch is a sort of fractured part of Alan, Zane possibly is as well.
Honestly, that angle I've never considered in 12 years of experiencing this story. I've never considered that particular angle, to be honest. And I like it. I like it, to be honest.
It's possible. Because it's another one of those things where Remedy does this thing pretty often where they leave you off at the end of a story with some pretty big question marks, and that they give you a lot of little breadcrumbs, leading from each one, but they don't really resolve it, which is great. I mean, that's why we're able to even talk about this stuff.
Like, no joke, we could probably spend a couple hours just talking Zane by himself. Like,
sure.
No joke. But, because, the biggest thing, before, I would have argued against this entirely, because what I try to do when it comes to Alan and determining what is his machinations and what is reality pre-existing him is the nightmare. Anything to do, the nightmare and his first arrival to Bright Falls, anything that happened before he got to the cabin, I consider real. Anything that happened after the cabin where he was writing is part of his fiction, right?
Sure.
But we do see the bright light in his nightmare, and it's already speaking in that voice.
Mm-hmm.
So I always interpret that as, oh, well, Zane existed beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
Which we know that's not even necessarily the case. It's the bright presence.
Right.
And the only reason we made that connection is because on the poster, right before you exit the door and see the bright presence for the first time, you have the Tom the Poet poster. Now it's the Tom the Filmmaker about Tom the Poet poster, but that's besides the point.
Right.
And I'm curious if there was some kind of loose association for Alan between the two where he saw the poster, which was his own pseudonym, and then immediately witnessed the bright presence and then just linked the two together. And so when he sat down to write Departure, he says, oh yeah, that bright presence, that's Thomas Zane.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. And I honestly do go back and forth on when reality starts in the game, in the first Alan Wake game. Because I don't entirely understand how I don't entirely understand the nature of the lodge and how they enter, or not the lodge, but the cabin, I should say. How they entered the cabin, what the real nature of the cabin is. I understand that in the story that's being told, the cabin doesn't really exist anymore. So maybe it did exist in a sort of prime reality. But then it does confuse things further when you think about Clay Stewart and his investigations into Bright Falls, and depending on which reality he exists in, if he actually does exist in prime reality and was able to share a dream space with Alan.
I think he does, personally.
I think he does as well, but that would mean that I believe, going from what's in the book, the cabin doesn't exist by the time Alan reached it. So that maybe wasn't reality when him and Alice were driving up to the cabin.
Unless someone else created it, because obviously he couldn't have.
Right.
someone else would have had to do it. And we've already, I think we've kind of pseudo-established that the Dark Presence can't really do acts of creation, so it couldn't have created it. Maybe.
Right. It's very hard to say. I go back and forth on it because it's very muddy. And if you want to get even muddier, it doesn't make much sense that, and this could have been simply oversight or something. I know that Remedy and Sam Lake were very involved in the Bright Falls TV show, especially in terms of continuity.
Mm-hmm.
And, we see Alan driving into Bright Falls. We see the sign entering Bright Falls. It's nighttime. Alan wakes up. He's no longer in the driver's seat, and Alice is driving.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, at that point, if they're entering Bright Falls, they would have already crossed the ferry. In the TV show.
Because I believe that the ferry they're on is connecting Watery to Bright Falls, isn't it?
That's my understanding. Yeah, going from the map. So if the TV show is definitely canonical and that's not a mistake, there's nothing that accounts for that lost time.
And God, I'm trying to think, because it couldn't have been after the fact. It couldn't have been after the fact, because I think Alice is driving after they leave the diner, and it doesn't even get nighttime between that space of time and when they get to the cabin, so that wouldn't even matter.
Right. Yeah, it's still all daytime there. So it's an odd one where it's, depending on what you're looking at and what angle you look at it from, it's like it doesn't quite make sense for it all to be reality because the timelines don't necessarily match up.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure. This game always finds a way to smash my head open, I swear.
Yeah, I think it was over on the Remedy Mysteries subreddit. There's like a long thread about this where it's just kind of talking about where does reality start? Where does departure? If departure is the story that we're experiencing in Alan Wake Part 1, when do we actually enter that? It's hard to say conclusively. But
Yeah,
anyway, that
Sorry, I'm going to take it one step further real quick, because if we're going to go off the theory that Zane is just a pseudonym for Wake, then all the events that happened back in the 70s technically never actually happened, or he wrote and changed the past, where you can change history. But
Right.
I don't think that's the case, because how did Thomas Zane's narrative end? He wrote himself out of existence. Well, maybe he didn't exist in the first place, so there really wasn't anything, but that's just a loophole to say he existed that he didn't.
yeah.
And
I
that
think we'll
doesn't...
get some answers when the game actually comes out. That's my hope, is that, in the Alan Wake Illuminated book, there's a lot of development stories and background and all the characters, and they mentioned that they had a lot written about Thomas Zane, and decided at some point in the creative process to just go, you know what, let's leave him a mystery for now. So it's not like he's there without a backstory, or he's there, this superfluous kind of thing that's just, there is no answer. It's just a mystery for the sake of a mystery. They intentionally obscured his origins, and I think that we'll get a lot of those questions answered in Alan Wake 2.
Mm-hmm. God, I could literally go on for another hour about this guy. I mean, technically, those lights have been seen in Bright Falls before Alan showed up. There's newspaper articles about UFO sightings tied to the Bright Presence. Now, the entire he never existed would work fine, except for Cynthia Weaver seems to remember him. It's just like, ugh. Okay, we need to move past this, because I will literally keep your entire day just talking about Zane.
Yeah, I hear you.
Anyways, so I think that's everything we have on this for right now. What I plan to do when I'm ready to release this is I'll have a regular edited video, which is going to go over the biggest points that we talked about, and release them in the same week. So
Okay.
that's probably going to be a couple months down the line before we get to that point, because I have a backlog of a few other projects I'm working on. But I want to give you the opportunity, if you wanted to just advertise the channel, plug anything in there, feel free.
Yeah. So I'm part of a channel called Hidden Machine. It's myself. My name's Matt Hall, and I work with Andrew Taylor and Jordan Hill, and we put out videos every week. And, on this topic, we've done a lot of deep dives. We have like 30 hours worth of Remedy related videos. But, especially speaking of Alan Wake, last October, we did a thing called Waketober where we did a whole month of Alan Wake centered videos. And we go over a lot of things like the comics, the Alan Wake Files book, and even the Alan Wake strategy guide, the Alan Wake Illuminated book. A lot of these materials that I think a lot of people have access to, but I know a lot of people also haven't been able to see those. So we try to do nice 4K kind of flip through videos so fans can see some of these supplemental materials because they're crucial, I think, to understanding some of the deeper theories surrounding the Remedy games. And it's interesting that so much crucial information would be put into these kind of limited run print materials, but that is how it is. And so if you want to check that stuff out, that's available on our channel, Hidden Machine.
Absolutely. I'd 100% recommend checking them out because it's not just Remedy. They have a lot of different really good videos on other games as well. And just as an example for the strategy guide, they talk about Alan's mother and his relationship with her. That's nowhere in any of the games. This is the strategy guide.
Yeah, the strategy guide especially was extremely interesting for me to finally go through. I got a copy last year, and it's so wild. I spoke briefly to the author, and he was given some materials from Remedy and was told basically, go forth as you see fit, and there's a lot there. He was given a lot of access to the to the story and everything, and the strategy guide is written as a piece of like narrative fiction, basically.
And nothing's more Remedy than that,
it reads
right?
like a story. What's that?
Oh, I just said nothing's more Remedy than that, right?
No, I've never seen anything this in depth and for a strategy guide. It's written like you're looking for like a thermos, and it's like Alan. I can't do it justice, but
it's actual narrative and get details
it's an actual narrative giving you the steps to how to play the game, and you're reading the story of Alan Wake, similar to the novelization of the game, but actually done one-to-one as a bit by bit strategy guide. It's so crazy. It's such a creative idea. I've never seen anything else like that.
And
Not to that degree.
Oh, dude, I hope they get back to it. Like, I think I'll leave this off where I hope that, because it seems like Alan Wake is where they did all this crazy creative ideas, and then they kind of abandoned it afterwards by the time they got to Quantum Break and Control. And I just really hope that they start getting back into that type of storytelling where your strategy guide is going to, or you'll start releasing a blog spot randomly without telling anybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that would
I would love to see more of that.
Because it's just fun.
It's very exciting. It's very, very exciting.
100%. But yeah, I think we're going to leave this one off here. If you have any ideas down the line, if there's any other topics you want to cover, let me know. We'll set another round of this up.
Okay.
Because I know I have a few more planned, but that's going to be over the course. Probably when we get more news drops, I think would be the best bet.
Yeah, and it could be fun to, this would be way down the line, but it could be fun to kind of revisit Max Payne in preparation for the remasters.
Do you know when the remaster's coming out?
I feel like I saw 2024.
Okay, so it's going to be a
definitely
while then.
it's way down the line.
Yeah, because I can't wait to do a compare and contrast. Like, granted, I've only played Max Payne 1 and 2 once, so I'm not the biggest expert on all the nitty-gritty details of it, but I'd love to do like a side-by-side comparison and see what they added and how it's going to link into the main RCU. Because I think that's what they're doing with this, is they're going to use this as an excuse to link into the RCU more.
That's really my hope, and I don't see why they wouldn't, because, only because they're so cool with Rockstar. Rockstar's been so crucial to so many things they've done already. I think there'll be a lot of that, and man, it's also just interesting because I played through Max Payne 2, I think 2 or 3 times now. And every time I visit it, it's similar to Alan Wake or Control, where I'm like, wow, I totally missed this other deeper layer to things. Like, it's interesting to see them at the start of that sort of really deep storytelling and that multi-layered storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a lot more simplistic. There's no documents or anything like that. But it's crazy. It's just crazy. And so just to think of them revisiting it, I can only imagine they would go even deeper on that stuff.
100%. But I'm going to go ahead and let you go on here. Do you have a video you want me to plug in right here for everyone to check out or in the description?
I don't know why I can't think of one right now. I'll send you a link.
All right, sounds good. I'll throw it down if anyone wants to go check out their work. I'm going to leave a link to the channel and a link to the video in particular down in the description. And I'll see you guys all next time when we sit down, and we already have it scheduled for the next game. I'm not going to say what it is, but we're going to be talking about another community corner with a new game as well. See you all then. Thank you so much.